Hello world, and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. I'm Blaze Stewart, an architect at Winelect, and today we're going to be continuing our series on building a serverless blog on Microsoft Azure. So today we're going to be looking at what goes into making a page happen. I'm going to go over the algorithm that I'm using to assemble the page for the serverless blog. So it first starts off with a post template. Now, from last time, we saw some tags that had two @ in front of some tags that were represented in the template. What I've done is I've actually created a template that can have multiple parts, and the parts themselves are denoted by three @ there. So if you see @ part 1, then closing that with @ it actually references some other part that is also stored in Blob storage. So part 1 would just be some HTML that's part of the template that can also have tags in it as well. So I have this entry point template that then can reference other parts that can be shared across multiple templates. So it allows me to have a separate template for like posts and pages for that matter, so I can share a header or footer or things like that within my given template. So once I have those parts loaded, I then assemble a template that will then look like the tags that we saw last time we looked at this in our last video. And those tags reference plugins, content, and data. So what I did is I extended the content to enable tags to be present in the content itself. So I can embed tags that are very much like the ones that are in the template to reference things that are both plugins and data. Now, plugins can also reference data and content because plugins are essentially just code that I write against whatever I want to. So if I want to go do an HTTP request at some website, I can download content and then import that into my template by way of a plugin, or I can just reference the data that's available on the objects that I'm passing into my plugin. And so that gets collated into a plugin. Now, because content can have tags, it can reference both plugins and data and embed that into the content. So this gives me multiple layers of customizability. Either I can do it in the template and reference data, or I can do it inside of the content that gets embedded in the template on a per page or per post basis. And once I have all of the content assembled, I have my data assembled, and I have my plugins called, then I can go about actually compiling the page or post. And that is the final product that gets uploaded into Blob storage as just HTML that can be referenced on my public website. So this is the overview of the algorithm that I'm actually doing inside of the code. So I want to go over the code in a little bit of detail to kind of give you an idea of the various parts. It looks a lot different from the last time we looked at it, because last time it was more of a proof of concept, and I've worked from that proof of concept into something that's a little bit more like what you might see in the final product. So as of right now, I have an entry point into this application called init, and this init function is the first thing that gets called and before it goes into the various branches for assembling pages and posts. And what this does is it creates a context object that gets passed around throughout the application, and this basically just has config data about the site as well as the clients for my admin service, table service in my admin site, Blob storage account, and my Blob storage service and my Blob storage account. And then I have the publish site Blob service as well. And then it goes through the table storage in the admin site to load up various settings about the website here. So it's calling the admin service and looking for a query entity where the partition key equals config, and then it loads that those various entities and then loops over them and then puts them into the context object. So what that looks like down here in Storage Explorer is a table that I have called config, and it's basically looking for anything that has a partition key, and the key value pair then becomes the row key and the value here. So that basically is what gets put into the object. And I have things like site description, site name, and the date format. So these are just settings for the website. So once I have that config loaded up, I can then start actually building posts and pages. So let's go back down here to my code in Visual Studio Code. I can call build page or build posts. These are basically identical to one another and how they work. So I'm not going to go over both of them, but I can definitely go into one of them. So let's go down here to build posts. And build posts, the first thing it does is actually loads the template for posts. So it's going to call this load template method, and I can go to type definition down here, and load template is a function with a callback. This is the template name, the context. That's that context object I created in the init, and then the callback. And it's basically just going out there and getting the template name, which is called post, and then it's looping over that it's parsing it really, and then looking for that 3 @ signs here for anything that might be referenced in this piece here. And it's loading those template parts into it, going out to blob storage, getting the pieces, then ultimately coming down here and assembling that into a given template. And once it gets all the parts into an object, it calls this assemble template, which is defined above. Go to type definition, and this just basically loops over the properties on that object called template parts right here, and assembles a string, and then calls the callback. So it's basically going out there to blob storage, getting the root template, and then parsing it for this, and then loading those other blobs, and then building a larger template out of these blobs. So let's go back to blob storage and look at those various pieces here. So instead of loading those off the hard drive, I put these in this pages blob storage account here, and under theme, and that's it's pages theme is the folder, and it's loading this post right here. And if I open this up and I look at it, if I go down here to maybe Notepad++, we can take a look at this and load up this. You can see here I have one called header and one called footer, and that is what is being referenced to in my blob storage account down here as header and footer. So it's basically just inserting the contents of header into my document here. So let's take a look at this. I can pull up Notepad++, and you can see here this has still got tags in it, but it's not a full template, it's just the header of my template. So once I have that assembled and all that is processed, I can then call a callback, which is going to be a part of my build posts algorithm here. And build posts is then going to take that template, which is pass back into this by way of callback, and then it's going to go out there and load all the posts for this particular object, and then it will go into the actual table that represents this. And we've already looked at this a little bit last week. It builds a property object from the entities, and anytime there's a tag, an @ title, for instance, referenced inside of my template, it will substitute the value of these into that particular object. Now, if I have a plugin reference, though, that takes a different path that we're going to look at here in a minute. Now, once I have that object populated and I've done some scrubbing on the data for the next URL and previous URL for this particular post, it's going to call upload page, which is really a misnomer. I need to rename this method. I'm going to go to definition, and this is where it actually goes out and loads up the content for the actual thing that's being referenced by way of the post. So this is the part where it starts to merge in the content into the template after we've assembled the template and we got the actual post context. So that property object is the post, and it's really just looping over this throughout this. So it's going to call out there and get some content and for the pages, and then it's going to again go through this parse template method, but in this case it's going to go to the page content template, and it's calling the parse template on that. So it's basically looking for anything that references @ inside of the content for the post, not just the template. So this actual parse template will get called again down here for the template this time instead of the content. And in this case, it's passing in the same property object and context. So the content can have tags in it as well as the template. And if there's content in if there's tags in the content, then those get substituted in by way of plugins or data, and then I can use parse template for the actual template itself with content or data. And then once it has all of that assembled and it's rendered that page back, and we looked at this last week, so I'm not going to go into detail on how that actually works. It will then render the page, and then it will upload that into Blob storage. So that's an overview of the changes that I've made since last week, and these parse templates are pretty much the same thing. I do want to look at a template a little bit, one of the plugins a little bit more in depth here. I've worked on one called Menu, and this is basically rendering the menu for the actual object here. So in the actual plugins, I can do things with the context as well. And this particular one is just going out to the config and looking for an object that will have menu items defined in it, and is looking for partition key equals menu, and the actual data value that it's looking for is called menu items, and then it gets the value of that and it loops over that and builds out some kind of HTML with the menu items that are defined in an object. So that's fairly straightforward as far as what's going on inside of this plugin here. And once it gets done, it then calls a callback with an HTML string, and that's what gets put into either a content or into the actual template. So you can see here how I'm assembling multiple things from blob storage, be it table storage or object storage with the blob storage, and then going through an algorithm to assemble a page that then gets put back into blob storage. So to kind of show you where the state of this is, I can come down here to Azure and then look up the actual link for this, which I will do now. I'm here in the Azure portal looking at a resource group, Serverless blog, and I have my admin site storage account and my published site storage account. Now I'm going to open this published site storage account and come down here to my static website to get the URL, which is entry point right here. But notice I have this index name, this document called index here. This is a page that gets published by my algorithm. So if I go down to Storage Explorer, I have here inside of my admin site storage container here called pages, I have pages, posts, and theme. We were looking at theme earlier for the parts of my template, but posts and pages are where my pages and post content is stored. I'm going to come back in here, and this is my index page. And this has nothing in it really, but if I open this up, I can then look at it, and inside of Notepad++, and it's referencing a plugin, so it's actually using a plugin to populate the content of what's going to show on my homepage, which really isn't nothing much at this point. But let's go back to Azure storage here and in the portal, and grab this URL and copy that to the clipboard and open up a new tab and paste it in. And this will show you the site as it sits right now, which really isn't much, but it's got a little grid going on here pointing to the various posts that I have, that this was built by that plugin that I was referencing earlier. And then I have this menu that it's building up here. And if I click on any one of these, it drills down into a post right here, and then I can navigate to the other posts. There's still some bugs I'm working out in this, but you can get the idea that I'm doing what I'm doing here, and I have the ability to create these pages from a template on a algorithm that is using Node.js. Now my next goal is going from here is to get some of the admin site built so that I can start actually populating some posts and then actually building out some of the APIs that will be used to actually build these posts, that I can edit these posts in and create new posts or delete posts and do those kinds of management things by way of an API. And that site will then be on the actual admin site, the actual UI that is calling the APIs, which will be hosted on some back-end storage that is part of app services using Azure Functions. So that's where I'm going to go next with this. So stay tuned for the next update on this little project about how to build a serverless blog on Microsoft Azure. If you like this content, please consider visiting us online at www.wintellect.com, and there you can find about services that Wintellect offers, including training and consulting services. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to get notifications when new content becomes available, and also comment down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheOneMule, and also follow Wintellect on Twitter at WintellectNow or at Wintellect. We are constantly posting things about Azure-related technologies and things related to software development. You can also reach us by email at consulting@wintellect.com. Until next time, thank you.